1세션의 주제는 트럼프 2기 행정부와 새로운 국제질서입니다. 유명환 전 외교부 장관님께서 1세션 좌장을 맡아주시겠습니다. 장관님, 진행 부탁드립니다.
여러분 반갑습니다. 오늘 그 제41차 세종용서 국가전략포럼에 참석해 준 데서 먼저 감사를 드리고 사회 진행은 앉아서 하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 먼저 오늘 주제가 아주 매우 시적절합니다. 특히 이 전략 포럼을 준비해 주시고 또 초청해 주신 이영준 그 세종용서 이사장님께 감사드리고, 그다음에 김현욱 또 소장님께 또 감사를 드립니다. 우리가 조금 전에 그 기조연설을 들었습니다만은 매우 지금 세계 정세가 심각하게 돌아가는 것 같습니다. 특히 오늘의 주제도 트럼프 2기 행정부와 그 한국의 외교 안보 전략이 이제 1세션의 주제입니다. 오늘 네 분의 발표자를 모셨는데 제가 매우 감탄을 했습니다. 우선 알렉스 웡 전 그 국가안보부보좌관, 그 National Security Advisor, Deputy Advisor, 트럼프 행정부에 작년 일을 하시고, 그 전에도 알렉스 웡 그 부보좌관은 국무성의 Deputy Assistant Secretary, 부차관보로서 있으면서 특히 이 한국, 북한 문제, 특히 그 제1차 트럼프, 김정은 싱가포르 회담, 하노이 회담, 미북 정상회담에 그 직접 관여를 하신 분이고 해서 북한 핵 문제뿐만 아니고 한반도 정세, 아시아 정세를 매우 잘 알고 계시는 분, 오늘 이렇게 귀한 걸음해 주신 것에 대해서 특별히 감사드립니다. 그 다음에 그 야부나카 미토지 선생님은 사실 제가 20년 전에 주일대사 할 때 같이 많이 했고, 일본 외무성에서 가장 중요한 아시아 대항주 국장을 하시면서 특히 그때 북한 핵 문제, 우리 한반도 평화본부하고 직접 회의를 하시고, 또 그런 6자회담, 4자회담 다 관여를 하시면요. 그다음에 외무성에서 가장 그 높은 정치인이 아니고 할 수 있는 최고위직이 사무차관입니다. 사무차관을 하시고 지금 오사카 대학에서 강의를 하신 분이 돼서 특히 한반도의 정세에 대해서 해박한 지식을 가지고 계신 분입니다. 그다음에 이제 게오르그 슈미트 주한국 독일대사님은 현직이시기 때문에 또 외무성에 속하고 태국 대사도 하셨고 또 일본 근무도 하신 걸로 전 듣고 있습니다만은, 특히 이 지난 한 20년 이후 2020년 이후에 한국 또 나토, EU하고의 관계를 매우 강화해서 우리도 EU하고 기본협정도 하고, 최초로 그때 반기문 외교부 장관이 2005년인가 나토 사무에 가셔서 나토 대표 여러분들하고 회의도 하시고 한 것이 직접 한국과 나토하고의 관계를 돈독히 하는 계기가 됐다고 생각합니다. 그리고 신범철 전 국방부 차관님은 군인이 아니시고 국방부 차관을 하셨지만 소위 문민 통제 상징적으로 외교부의 정책기획관을 외교부에서 하셨고, 그다음에 또 싱크탱크에서 국제안보 방위 문제 해박한 지식을 가지고 있기 때문에 제가 보기엔 네 분이 가장 발표자 패널리스트로서는 참 이렇게 같이 한 자리 하기 어려운 분들을 이렇게 다 초청해 주시고 또 참석해 주셔서 대신 감사의 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 그래서 오늘 진행은 우선 네 분이 앉은 순서대로 한 10분 정도 시간에 구애받지 마시고 우리가 12시 반까지니까 충분히 시간이 있습니다. 그래서 편하신 대로 발제를 해주시고 그 끝나면은 제가 우선 각 분들한테 한 가지씩 질문을 드리고 그 다음에는 여기 나오신 패널 분들께서 서로 상대방의 질문을 좀 하심으로써 조금 참석하신 분들의 철학이나 어떤 판단, 분석을 좀 직접 들어보는 그런 시간을 갖겠습니다. 그리고 나머지 한 30분 정도는 이 플로어에서도 좀 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. 사회자로서 세션을 시작하기 전에 오늘 주제에 대해서 저 나름대로 한두 포인트 말씀드리겠습니다. 지금 제목 자체는 트럼프 2기와 한국의 외교안보 전략이라고 나왔습니다만은 사실 현재는 엄청난 대전환의 시기라고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면 지금까지 트럼프 1기 때부터 또 그렇고 2기 또 미국 내 여론 또 쉽게 얘기하는 마가 세력이랄까요, 트럼프를 지지하는 미국 내 여론의 핵심은 부상하는 중국에 대해서 어떻게 대처할 것인가 하는데 포커스가 맞춰져 있고 중국과는 달리 미국은 그동안에 동맹국들과 같이 그런 부상하는 중국, 미국의 패권에 도전하는 중국에 대해서 어떻게 대처할 것인가. 이것은 2015년으로 올라갑니다. 시진핑 주석이 이제 2012년에 정권을 잡고 대통령으로서 캘리포니아에서 그때 미국 오바마 대통령을 만났을 때 신형 대국 관계라는 걸 얘기를 했습니다. 그것이 무엇을 의미하는지는 모르지만 그것을 계기로 미중 간의 어떤 라이벌리라고 그러나요? 그런 것이 이제 본격화되고 미국의 초점이 이제 그런 중국의 견제 이걸로 생각을 했고 제가 작년 말에 미국에 가서 그 골드 인스티튜트라고 트럼프를 서포트하는 그런 플린 장군이 하는 그런 모임에 한번 갔었습니다. 근데 모든 토론의 포커스가 중국을 어떻게 동맹국들과 힘을 합해서 견제를 하고 평화를 유지하고 동북아시아의 안전을 유지하느냐 하는 겁니다. 그런데 이제 작년 4월부터 2기 들어와가지고 아까 기조연설을 하는 분이 얘기했습니다만은 이런 관세 전쟁, 또 동맹국들에게도 무차별한 관세 문제, 또 우크라이나 전쟁을 대하는 트럼프 행정부의 입장, 러시아에 대한 입장에 있어서 상당히 좀 혼란스러운, 어떻게 보면 새로운 국제질서를 얘기하기 전에 대혼란, 어떻게 보면 대전환이라고 할 수도 있고 이런 상황이 있습니다. 그래서 우리의 외교안보 전략을 세우기 전에 우선 이것이 어떤 현상이고 어떻게 될 것인가 하는 전망을 예측하는 것이 우선 가장 중요하다고 보는데, 그런데 이제 지난달에 이란, 이스라엘과 미국의 이란 공습, 또 이란의 반응이 걸프 국가에 대한 또 공격. 어떻게 보면 이게 이미 3차 대전이 시작된 것이 아닌가 하는 그런 생각마저 들게 하는 혼돈의 시기에 앞으로 어떻게 국제 정세가 전개될 것인가. 시계 제로라고 저는 생각합니다. 조금 전 우리 시간 10시 40분 전에 트럼프 대통령이 대국민 연설을 하신다고 그랬는데 그 내용을 저는 아직 알지 못하고 있습니다만 하여튼 오늘의 토론의 주제는 그런 현상, 현재 국제 정세와 이런 시계 제로 속에서도 앞으로 어떤 상황이 전개되고 거기에 대해서 우리가 어떤 입장으로 대처해야 될 것인가 하는 그런 문제의식을 가지고 오늘 토론을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 그럼 제일 먼저 알렉스 웡 보좌관님께서 발언을 해주시기 바랍니다.
Well, first of all, Mr. Minister, thank you for those remarks, but also just thank you for this invitation to me to join this august panel and to discuss issues that are of course great import to Korea, to the U.S.-Korea alliance, and to the Indo-Pacific writ large. But the issues that we're going to discuss are also of personal importance to me. As the minister said, I spent a number of years in my career at the State Department, in the private sector, and at the White House, very much focused on the Indo-Pacific region, but in particular, the U.S.-Korea alliance and security on the Korean Peninsula. So it's a real privilege to be here to see where we are across all these important issues here in 2026. Now, the theme of this panel in this conference, Trump 2.0 and world order, I think there is, understandably, a lot of focus on the personal policy, the personal style, and the approach centered on President Trump as a leader, as a geopolitical actor, and that's understandable and I think warranted. But I want to step back and point out that the policies of President Trump, whether in Trump 1 or here now in Trump 2, have resonance in the United States and reflect structural changes in the strategic landscape across the world. And this is why we are seeing it. In addition to his personal policy preferences and his personal style, we are looking at changes in the strategic landscape. Therefore, I think a number of these policies or a number of these approaches from the United States as well as from our partners across the free world will be lasting. Now, what do I mean by that? I think it's important to look back from what I would term the prior strategic period, roughly from the fall of the Soviet Union to, let's say, the election of President Trump in 2026, a 25-year time period, essentially a generation. And I think it's important to point out that that 25-year period was actually a unique moment in world history. Some have called it the unipolar moment. And that is actually a departure from what the normal strategic landscape usually is in world history, where there are competing powers, great power competition. Instead, during that 25-year period, we were in a situation where America did lead the world, where there was a general Pax Americana. And if that's the case, you can have certain policies and adopt certain approaches to the world and have certain structures that work, whether that's lowered trade barriers or that's specialization across economies where you are maximizing efficiency in global trade, whether that's stepping back from defense spending globally, whether in the United States or in Europe or in Asia, where the US can provide global security on less investment in defense. These were all things that could work in the 1990s, early 2000s period. But with changes in the geopolitical landscape, as powers rise, let's talk about China, as China has developed and increased its economic and industrial strength and its defense power. As we've seen Vladimir Putin in Russia step back from some of the reforms that were nascent in the 90s, in the 2000s, and become more aggressive, become more revisionist in the shape, ultimately, of multiple land invasions, but the largest land invasion and the largest war on the European continent in a generation. As these trends develop, the policies and the strategic approach of the United States, as well as our allies and partners, has to change. We can't live in a 1990s world anymore. So this is why President Trump's approach has resonance. So what does this mean? It does go to the trade question. This does mean that maximizing efficiency, specialization, moving manufacturing away from developed economies, whether it's the United States or Europe, to other economies, that can't happen anymore. Because Western nations, I'm going to take this out of my ear because I'm hearing double. Apologies. Western nations have recognized the need of modicum, a critical mass at least, of productive capacity across manufacturing sectors, whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's shipbuilding, whether that's defense, whether that's other critical inputs into the economy, refined critical minerals, castings, forgings. I could go down the list. But countries understand that from a trade perspective, some barriers need to be raised to bring back manufacturing so that there's resilience in this new strategic order. Let's go to defense spending. President Trump's policies on enhancing defense spending, not just in the United States. In the first term, he adopted the largest defense budget since the Reagan years as a percentage of GDP, and he's done it again in Trump 2.0. And the reason he has done that is he understands that we need to reestablish deterrence globally. The United States still has global interests. But at the same time, President Trump is asking our allies in Europe, in Asia, elsewhere, to enhance their defense spending so we have a more balanced burden sharing for security across the world. Again, this is something that in the 1990s, early 2000s, perhaps was not warranted. It's warranted now. So these are trends that I think are lasting. Now, I want to go back, however, to the focus on President Trump, the man. I think it is definitely true and really irrefutable that he has a certain strategic boldness that you have not seen, or we have not seen in America from other presidents. He is unorthodox. He is not captured or cabined by the thinking that perhaps reigned in foreign policy thinking in the 90s and 2000s. And this is why you see him taking bold action, whether that's in the first term, the killing of Qasem Soleimani, whether that's here in the second term, his action in Venezuela to capture Maduro, whether that's the pressure he's putting on currently on Cuba, or whether that is the actions from the beginning of last year towards Iran, on Gaza, across the Middle East. Because what he is seeing is these are areas that have been consistent problems, whether that's an Iranian regime that wields terrorism and the threat, not just of conventional warfare, but of nuclear capability to destabilize and, to be frank, kill Americans in the Middle East, but threaten our allies in the region and threaten world trade via shipping and oil. He has seen Cuba as a problem in our own Western Hemisphere. He's seen Venezuela as a problem in the Western Hemisphere, acting as a vector for foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere, as well as destabilizing America through drugs and compromising our border. So he is taking the opportunity, taking this moment to fix those strategic problems and place the United States, as well as our allies, on stronger footing over the long term for this new world of geopolitical competition. I think, given that we are here in Korea, it's important to ask the question, what does this mean for the U.S.-Korea alliance? And my feeling is that this changed strategic landscape and the policies of the Trump administration, which I think will persist in many ways, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat who follows President Trump in the next term. What does this mean for the U.S.-Korea alliance? And I think the key point I want to make is I think this is an opportunity for the U.S.-Korea alliance to take advantage of the strengths that Korea has developed and to elevate the nature and deepen the nature and diversify the nature of the U.S.-Korea alliance. away from just a security and military alliance, but towards one that's focused on shared technology, that's shared building of industrial resilience. This is very clear in the U.S.-Korea trade deal. President Trump looks at the Korean economy. He looks at the achievements of Korea across advanced manufacturing, across innovation, across heavy industrial sectors. And this is an opportunity to build that resilience in the United States, but also deepen the alliance. So I think it's definitely a changing world, but one in which the U.S.-Korea alliance will have actually increased relevance to regional security. I will stop there because I've talked long enough. But again, it's wonderful to be here.
감사합니다. 우리 알렉스 웡 안보부보좌관은 1기 때도 트럼프 행정부 일하셨고 2기 때도 일하셨기 때문에 지금 그런 트럼프 행정부의 시각에서 설명을 해주셨고 감사합니다. 한 가지만 덧붙이자면 그 한국의 이거 하나의 기회라고 말씀하시는 분에 제가 논의 발족도 있는데 거기에 기술 분야에 있어서 우리가 한미 동맹을 강화하는 거 이제 어떻게 보면 지오폴리틱스에서 그 테크노폴리틱스라고 기정학을 얘기하는 분들도 있기 때문에 우리가 한미 동맹의 앞으로의 발전 방향에 대해서도 그런 면에서 좀 생각할 필요가 있을 것 같습니다. 감사합니다. 다음에는 그 야부나카 미도지 사무차관님께서 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. That I'm so honored to be here to participate in this very great the forum. Actually, that yesterday evening, I strolled around the Seoul city. It was a great sort of memories I had it. That 1973, actually Seoul is my first overseas post in government, working for the government. And I enjoyed so much of all those days, 1973, how many years ago. In any case, that's so nice to come back to this Seoul, the very great city today. Now, talking about this sort of changes, strategic changes in the last 25 years, whatever Mr. Wong just mentioned, I say that we have entered into the new era in the last 80 years, that starting from the end of World War II, and the two great sort of the principles we have worked out based upon that sort of two great principles we've been pursuing the peace and prosperity. One is about, of course, security areas, United Nations Charter, and do not use force to solve international relations. Sounds just sort of too whatever rosy and anything doesn't work out today, but nonetheless, that was a very important principle. We should work based upon rules and we should respect international law. And that having also culminated in the UN Charter. That's for security matters. And the other one on economy that they've been working on many years to advance what is called multilateral free trading system. It doesn't work in the case of President Trump. Multilateral is not there at all. Bilateral, if not unilateral. And free trading system doesn't work. That's how it comes out. So in any case, the first one, the United UN Charter, doesn't work since the 4 years ago that Russia invaded Ukraine, and systemic problems that the United Nations has it, that giving to 5 countries a veto power. So one of those sort of the countries who has the veto powers do invade and do contradict to the principles, then the system it doesn't work. And also on economic matters, as we have seen it, that WTO doesn't mean anything, at least to the President Trump. And that's where we are, meaning that we have entered into the new era. And also, along with that sort of big changes, alliance system in Asia, as well as also in the entire world, the free world, if you will, the alliance system does work, or has been the key sort of force to maintain the peace, at least for the Western camp, where ROK and Japan do belong to, and that has been working very well. But today, that alliance system, I don't know how much the respect does President Trump have it over the alliance system. And he never criticized, for example, the President Putin, that Russia has invaded the Ukraine, nor any critical sort of comment to President Putin is where we are. And critical sort of a comment to NATO, we have heard a lot, meaning that the alliance system is being challenged, is where we are also. And also in Japan, we say we shared the common interests and we shared common sort of principles, which would mean democracy and the market economy type of things, and the kind of the partnership, if not alliance, does also serve great to advance our interest, is what we have been talking about. So of course for Japan, Japan-US alliance is only the one system based upon treaty, but also in much broader terms, the partnership with like-minded countries who care about democracy, who care about human rights, and those kind of things. Now that has also been challenged. We don't know how much, how greatly the President Trump has paid any kind of significance to quote-unquote democracy or human rights or otherwise. And so we have to realize, yes, indeed, we have entered into the new era. Now coming back to the more recent sort of things, how Japan is reacting to this kind of changes. And as we have seen it, the Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi paid a visit to White House. She's one of very, very few, I think, the world leaders who somehow succeeded, quote unquote, succeeded in dealing with President Trump. And surprisingly enough, I don't know, is it a surprise to you or not? In Japan, America is very popular still. And so how she conducted her sort of the White House the meeting with President Trump, whatever it is being criticized on otherwise, 75% of the entire Japanese public supported it. And the kind of sort of the way she handled the President Trump. Flattering, yes, indeed. And yet somehow no big sort of the quote-unquote demand over Japan, sending the self-defense forces, the troops to wherever in the Middle East, Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. It didn't happen. So somehow it was regarded in Japan as a success story for her. But I'm one of very few people in TV make a rather critical comment to what she has been doing it. Certainly that the flattering itself doesn't work. And back in Japan, what is now taking place is could we nonetheless, yes, we love America, but nonetheless, could we count on America today? Could we count on President Trump? Trump-led America. That's a sort of big questions when it comes to Japan's sort of argument about our own security. And certainly that, as I mentioned, prior to this era, Japan-US Security Treaty is a sort of a basic and very strong sort of foot when we talk about anything about security, plus the kind of the partnership, as I said, with like-minded countries, in particular with ROK, Philippines, Australia, type of things. And those are, in a sense, how to meet with challenges with coming from China. We all know, and you all know, that this kind of sort of recent, more aggressive stance of China, and how to meet with those sort of the Chinese, whatever, is it concern, or is it threat, whatever. In Japan, that the people do recognize it is a very serious concern regarding the Chinese more aggressive attitude. And then how to meet with those challenges. And the US-Japan alliance or partnership with those like-minded countries. Does it work? Today's problem is that the question, will it work in the coming years or whatever? Could we count on, as I said, America? Would they come to help you when anything happened vis-a-vis China and Japan? Or will the sort of a like-minded countries' partnership make any differences when we deal with China? Those are what is now taking place. The other thing is that, as I said, rather kind of a sort of general atmosphere in Japan, talking about some sort of uncertainty over China that prevailing in Japan. And then Prime Minister Takaichi is mentioning last, October and early November the 7th, her statement with regard to Taiwan. And that has caused a huge sort of uproar over relations Japan and China to that extent. It was, as I see it, it was greatly misunderstood or received with a big sort of misunderstanding. That statement, when she said, if China takes a sort of military actions over Taiwan or threatening the Taiwan Strait, then that would bring us into the sort of situations where our kind of existence being challenged, certainly. And in that case, the kind of a sort of more collaborative actions, what is called the collective sort of partnership and the self-defense systems should work, meaning that America first goes there, and then Japan will be also joining America to meet those kind of challenges. That's what was spoken in accordance with Japanese legal sort of systems, but that was too complicated. And when it is reported in English in particular, Japan and Japan's self-defense forces will fight against China if anything happens over Taiwan. And so that's a big sort of differences between what is now said actually and being received in Japan and being sort of regarded in overseas. Now, on this point and as well, I'm urging the following sort of a kind of the diplomacy that Japan should endeavor to. Number one, in meeting those sort of challenges I'm talking about, nonetheless, first thing, of course, is Japan-US security alliance is a key to our sort of security. That remains so. And it is, of course, bounded by the treaty. And of course, we respect very much and appreciative of American sort of commitment to defend Japan. But also, as you know, the US bases in Japan does, of course, provide our security, but also for the interest of the entire or more global sort of strategic interest of America. Everybody knows that. So we have to continue to have this kind of an arrangement for the benefit of both parties, for the security, maintenance of security in this East Asia region. Second is, of course, nonetheless, could we count on China, could we count on America? That kind of sentiment is rising also in Japan. And in order to meet those sort of challenges, medium-sized the countries, Canada also mentioned about, and the European countries, these days somehow Japan is pretty popular. Many the world leaders are visiting Japan, and today the President Macron is now in Japan. Last several days back, it was Indonesia. The President came to Japan. Those kind of sort of arrangement and meeting of minds, how to cope with together of this changing the circumstances is another sort of a second, maybe the answer to that matters. But thirdly, more importantly, this is what I'm saying, that I haven't succeeded yet in Japan to have a much broader support to kind of the idea is nonetheless we have to come back to East Asia. regional cooperation among East Asian countries. I have started it actually in the early 2000. Why not advancing Japan, ASEAN, and together with ROK and China. That's we call it ASEAN plus 3, and collaborations to advance regional cooperations. And we have done a great deal, but today we haven't seen much. Thanks to the better improvement of ROK-Japan relations, there are bases to advance that kind of sort of arrangement. Could we count on, and aren't you afraid of China? Yes, we are. But nonetheless, that the prospect of advancing more sort of cooperative relations with China is also possible, is my firm understanding. I'm the one that actually who made key decisions when the 7 Chinese landed over the Senkaku Island in 2004. I advised my prime minister, arrest those 7 people who landed on Senkaku Islands and bring back to the China. And so I was called, and I still interpreted in China. I'm a very tough against China person. But nonetheless, in Japan, I'm saying that it is possible to promote the kind of sort of serious understanding between Japan and China. And Takaichi's prime minister is saying, keeps saying it, she wants to have a stable and constructive relations with China. If that is the case, it's not enough for her to say, we're open to communication. You have to have a more proactive sort of stance to advance that sort of things. And I think that ROK in Japan can find the ways to further advance that kind of regional cooperations in this East Asia, is my firm belief. Thank you very much.
예, 감사합니다. 지금 저 야부나카 선생님은 다케치 총리의 지난번 방미가 성공적이었다고 평가를 하셨는데 저도 그렇게 생각합니다. 지금 트럼프 대통령을 과거에 생각하면 미국 대통령을 만난다는 게 하나의 그 자유세계의 리더로서 하나의 영광이고 또 반가운 마음으로 가서 만나고 그랬는데 이제는 트럼프 대통령을 만나면 그 리스크를 먼저 겁이 나는 두려움이 먼저 생기는 뭐 그런 상황이 됐기 때문에 현실이고 제가 보니까 다카이치 총리가 아주 잘 하신 것 같아요. 트럼프가 악수를 내미니까 악수 집어치고 이렇게 허그를 함으로써 트럼프가 어려운 그런 문제를 제기할 기회를 프리엠티브 제거하고 잘 무사히 끝날 것 같고 또 그 자유대 호르무즈 해협 파견 문제도 평화헌법 미국이 일본에 제의했던 그 평화헌법 구조에 따라서 그런 어려운 자유대를 파견하기가 어려운 상황을 잘 설명한 것으로 이렇게 보도가 됐습니다. 예, 감사합니다. 다음엔 우리 엠바서더 슈미트, 게오르그 슈미트, 슈미트 대사님께서 그 트럼프 2기의 이런 대외 정책에 대한 유럽 또 네이토의 시각에 대해서 말씀해 주시기를 기대합니다.
Thank you very much. Thank you to be invited to this panel, distinguished panel, Minister. And I'm very glad I'm the only European sitting up here. But we see behind here, here is only Korea's foreign policy, but the title was the new global order. And I think Europe does play an important part in that global order. Let me talk a little bit about the economy and security of Europe and Asia and the US. It's closely linked. I think it's quite obvious also for Europeans with North Korean troops now fighting on European soil, but other connections become very clear. I'm not going to give you a theoretical framework. I think we have enough of those, and they're very enlightening. The Canadian Prime Minister gave an impressive speech in Davos. Professor Walt just now, I think it was quite, when he summed it up as a predatory hegemon. This is very much a sentiment that many people have in Europe now, like why do our friends treat us like this? Why does the US as an ally treat us like this? And it's not helpful for the image of the US, even with people who are very transatlantic in their outlook. So in a way, in Europe, we're used to big powers in our neighborhood. The first closest is Russia, and there's a new level of aggression with the Russian war. That was called Zeitenwende, when there was a full-scale invasion. There were former, Georgia 2008, there is a lineup, and Eastern European nations have warned consistently against an imperialist, neo-colonial streak in Russian foreign policy. We're used to also other great powers like China, and there's a big issue with overcapacity now, which is threatening our industrial base seriously. So that's a big topic for us as well. But to have the US as a very strong friend and ally now treating us the way it does is something new. And it still takes time for people to process what's happening on the other side of events. If I look at that, because why is it so difficult? Because the gratitude to the US has not been forgotten. What the US did, you talked about the long lines after 1945 to stretch out the hands to the defeated Germany that attacked all its neighbors, that declared war on the US, and to make West Germany a friend. We have not forgotten about this. To also very clearly support German unification. We have not forgotten about this. We had our differences. For instance, we said no to the Iraq War in 2003. We abstained when it went to Libya in 2011. We had our differences. We said we can say no to a friend, but it was always based on a very strong base of friendship. Well, what's happening now is different. And there's still many people who say, look, the relationship with the US is an important one that goes beyond Trump. So it's interesting when I hear you saying, yes, it resonates. So think beyond Trump and don't think we will go back to something else. Maybe many Europeans made this mistake where they thought, oh, Trump is an aberration. It's very interesting to look at that. We have a lot of German companies in the US. We create almost 1 million jobs there. It's a big trading partner. And we have overlapping interests, of course, when we look at securing rare earth material, etc. But it's not helpful, I must also tell you, that whenever there's something happening, that we see a treaty that threatens us. For a long time, the US was very unhappy with Germany buying gas from Russia. And now we see and say, like, look, we can provide you with LNG. And now we see a threat coming from a tweet saying, like, oh, if Europe doesn't do this and this, we won't deliver energy to you. Or if this doesn't happen. It's very difficult to rely on a commercial partner when commercial deals are being put into question like this. And we also see that there's a streak in MAGA that wants to undermine European unity. When you see travels to Hungary and Slovakia, the two countries that are actively undermining, we are used in Europe to have very long discussions and long nights. But last December we agreed on something, and to see one leader then saying, we go back on that word, we go back on that agreement, that's not how the EU can work. That makes it difficult. And then to see this being supported from the outside, of course you put things together. Where does that leave Germany? The world's third largest economy in nominal GDP terms, highly industrialized, different structure, Mittelstand providing most of the jobs. We are also built in a way a bit similar like Japan, I would say, on peace and open markets. We do not sit on open resources. We profited enormously from a global division of labor, where sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But overall, the WTO and GATT rules, we could work with them, and it was good for us. We lost many areas in the process, but we gained others. Actually, look at the microphone, it's by Sennheiser, German company formed in 1945, so we're there. So where does it leave us? I say a few things about security and economics. Security, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine is still our largest and most direct threat to European security. Germany has provided 55 billion euros in support for Ukraine militarily. 55 billion euros. We're the largest supporter in Europe by far. And we are also, you see this now, you see that we're profiting from the Ukrainian experience in jointly producing systems, defense systems. I felt it was very interesting that the Gulf states also required Ukraine assistance very quickly. It's not a situation anybody would have hoped for, but Ukraine has this wartime experience, and if we combine that with the German industrial strength, there are lots of things happening. But this is the military support. Go on with the civilian support, disaster readiness, and by the way, we're also hosting roughly 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany. In security, we will increase our security spending. There, what you outlined, we had a consensus in 2014, we didn't stick to it, and I think it was not just the Trump administration, but it was also previous US administrations who rightly criticized Germany for not living up to its commitments. Now we are increasing our spending dramatically, and it's quite, I think, remarkable that you see also discussions about nuclear cooperation with our French allies. This is something I think is to be noted. What's going to happen there? Security in Asia, you can see an increased, enlarged German footprint also in Asia, and it goes beyond our deployments. 2 years ago, we had a deployment of maritime units, others. It goes beyond that. Our Minister of Defense just visited Singapore. Singapore will host a hub for maintenance of German-built submarines. There's a status of forces agreement with Australia now being signed. We had reciprocal agreements with Japan for troop exchanges. Our Minister of Defense just visited Japan. So the cooperation goes, I would say, beyond punctual deployments. And again, we're far away. We will not be able to replace the US in any way as guarantor of military security. But there are lots of goods and services that we do, and there's a lot of things that we do consistently also. Germany, by the way, is also a member of the UNC now. We cooperate in MMST in sanctions, and we have been very clear about any violent change of the status quo in Taiwan. And I think it matters to speak out. It matters to speak out. You can say also this is symbolism, but it matters when our ships also sail between China and Taiwan. Others don't, we do. This is about that security is not just physical security, it's very much energy security. And if I compare the crisis in 1973, I was not on my first diplomatic posting in 1973, but I do remember as a 10-year-old to use the bicycle on the German Autobahn because we had to shut down traffic because of the oil crisis in 1973. Our ratio of dependence has gone dramatically down. We're still importing a lot, but it's much, much less than Korea and Japan. I'm very thankful to that. We diversified our sources, mostly to European sources, Norway, UK, also North African sources, others, and renewables play a very important part. And if I hear the Korean president now saying that he wants to increase the share of renewables, our argument here was renewables is not just about decarbonization, it's also about energy security and autarky. It just gives you more policy space in troubled times. Remarks on the Iran war, I think you could follow also how Germany has positioned itself. The E3 have been advocating, have been very active in trying to find a diplomatic solution. Our Chancellor was very clear on the involvement militarily at the moment. He said in public, if you as an ally have not been even consulted before this war starts, how can you then expect an ally to step in when you run into problems? We follow it because it affects us greatly, not just with oil, but with all other areas. A few remarks on the economic situation, because whatever we can do, we can only do it if our economy is strong. And there is homework for Germany inside to be done. I will not give you a talk on that. But we need to remain open for talent and migration. And that's, I think, where Asia is very important. EU, Korea, EU Horizon Science and Cooperation, Science and Technology Cooperation. I see a lot of German companies increasingly locking in their value chains with their Korean counterparts. There's a long-term strategy there for them. I will come back to that. Trade system, I talked about the overcapacities from China and what kind of threat that is to us, that we will have to deal. This is part of the new global order as well. The EU, if you can see it, I would say it's becoming more protectionist. There's more of an industrial policy because we feel that this is something we need to do. So there's always been this argument: you love free trade when you're strong, and you like to protect it when you're weak. That's nothing new. But the level of criticism against the global division of labor and the level of politicization of trade in services and goods is something that we have not seen before. And that's very frightening because at the end of the day, it makes it more difficult for medium-sized countries, because we don't have the political leverage. We cannot tell you, look, you buy our products unless you do this and this and this and this. And it also applies to trades in services. Europeans are very happy to buy American services. We don't have our own coupon, we don't have our own cacao, we don't have our... We bought all this, but if you roll back on trades and in goods and manufacturing, then also expect a rollback on free trade and services. At the end of the day, who will pay the price? The consumer. Because a global division of labor made it cheaper for everyone. And consumers will pay the price if we create sort of separated spaces. If I would like to use the analogy, like the WTO of the World Trade System is in a sort of cardiac arrest, and you can see now that we're trying to put bypasses there. It was mentioned before also by Professor Walt. It's not a coincidence that the EU is doing trade deals now with India, Australia, Mercosur. We're very happy that we have an FTA with Korea. It helps our companies to have some kind of long-term stability. Does that mean the death of global order? I would say no, from a German perspective. No, we're very much committed to the international framework. There are some adjustments, yes. For instance, and there are some things that we do concretely. WTO, I would like to mention the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement that basically many OECD countries say WTO rules don't function, but let's voluntarily submit to them to have some kind of stability for our companies. Very useful, we feel. We're committed to the Paris Agreement. We're committed to climate change. To all this. This hasn't been mentioned before. I think that's very much a very real threat that concerns all of us. North, South Korea, Japan, Europe, the US. You can't have a discussion with physics. It doesn't work. And also the UN, with all its deficits, we're very much committed to it. And I will finish with that, look at the Pact for the Future. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Pact of the Future. It was co-sponsored by Germany and Namibia. It found an overwhelming approval rate, and if you look at that document, you might say, oh, it's dreaming. But why did so many countries support it? Because that's their vision of the world. That's very different, and that's their vision of a global order. Thank you very much.
네, 슈미드 대사님 감사합니다. 트럼프 행정부의 유럽에 대한 그런 자세 입장과 관계없이 유럽은 유럽으로서의 역할, 또 국제협력 기후 변화라든가 이런 데서 계속 역할을 하고 계시다는 것을 잘 엘로콘트하게 설명해 주셔서 감사합니다. 이따 제가 좀 다른 질문을 좀 드리도록 하고, 다음에는 우리 신범철 차관님께서 말씀해 주십시오.
네. Thank you, Chair, for your kind introduction. I also thank you, our Chairman Lee Yong-jun and President Kim Hyun-woo for having me this interesting and very valuable seminar. I also thank all participants for sharing your precious time. Today's subject is President Trump and the New World Order. I think that most of you understand what's going on today. And then further, since the audience are Korean, and I believe that my English is good enough to maintain my presentation. However, I think my translator's English is much better than me. So please permit my proceeding in Korean. So to make more clear to understand this complicated world. 세 가지로 나누어서 설명을 드리려고 해요. 먼저 트럼프 행정부의 전략, 그리고 그것으로부터 빚어지는 세계 질서의 변화 가능성, 그리고 한국의 대응입니다. 이미 잘 아시는 것처럼 트럼프 행정부가 출범한 이래 한 1년 반이 아직 안 됐는데도 우리가 관세 협상이나 오퍼레이션 미드나잇 해머, 또 오퍼레이션 Absolute Resolve, and 지금 벌어지는 오퍼레이션 에픽 퓨리 같이 많은 일들을 보고 있어요. 이 처음에 기조 세션 하는 동안 트럼프 대통령이 연설을 했습니다. 제가 좀 반칙을 했어요. 이사장님하고 우리 소장님 말씀하시는데 텔레비전 켜놓고 봤습니다. 요즘은 유튜브가 하도 좋아서 자막이 바로 달리더라고요. 그래서 트럼프 대통령이 뭔 이야기를 했나 했더니 예상되는 이야기를 했어요. 특별한 내용은 없고 미국이 이기고 있다. 전쟁은 빨리 끝날 것이다. 나토나 이런 동맹국들이 안 도와줬다. 기억할 것이다. 이게 트럼프 대통령의 주요 메시지였습니다. 저는 트럼프 대통령의 이런 행동을 상당히 예측을 한 편이었어요. 저도 뭐 뉴스 같은 데 나가서 설명을 했는데 그럼 어떤 근거로 이런 방향을 이야기했느냐. 저는 3가지 키워드를 우리가 반드시 기억해야 된다고 생각합니다. 트럼프 행정부 이야기하면 우리가 늘 아메리카 퍼스트, 미국 제일주의다. 그것만 생각하는데요. 그 밑에 몇 가지 프린시플 같은 게 있는데 이게 대단히 중요하다고 생각해요. 그 3가지 제가 오늘 이야기하고 싶은 것은 flexible realism, 우리는 유연한 현실주의라고 하고, 두 번째는 primary responsibility, 동맹국들이 우선적인 책임을 져야 된다는 거 하고요. 미국의 strategic flexibility입니다. 전략적 유연성인 거죠. 이 3가지가 지금 트럼프 행정부의 대외 정책을 실질적으로 지배하고 있는 원칙이다. 그렇기 때문에 사실은 트럼프 행정부 먼저 플렉시블 리얼리즘을 보면 더 이상 과거 미국이 이야기했던 리버럴 인터내셔널 오더, 자유주의적 국제질서 이야기하지 않고 미국의 이익과 부합하면 타협할 수 있다는, 어떻게 보면 이게 트럼프 대통령이 지닌 거래 기술적인 접근이라고 생각해요. 그렇기 때문에 베네수엘라에서 마두로 대통령을 체포한 다음에 정권 교체를 하지 않고 로드리게스와 손을 잡을 수 있었던 것이고, 지금도 이란의 정권 교체가 이루어지지 않았지만 트럼프 대통령은 이란의 새로운 지도자는 much more reasonable, 훨씬 더 합리적이다 이야기하면서 거래 가능성을 이야기를 하고 있는 거예요. 이게 첫 번째 키워드고요. 두 번째, primary responsibility가 사실은 미국은 제가 잠시 후에 세계 질서를 4가지로 이렇게 나누어서 구분하려고 한다 설명할 건데, 그것은 뭐냐면은 미주 대륙에서는 미국이 절대적인 우위를 확보하는데, 그렇지만 인태 지역에서는 중국을 견제하는데 한국, 일본, 호주가, 중동 지역에서는 이란을 견제하는데 UAE, 사우디, 요르단, 그리고 다른 뭐 튀르키예까지는 아니겠지만 그런 관련국들이, 그리고 유럽에서는 러시아를 견제하는데 유럽의 나토 동맹국들이 책임을 우선적으로 져라. 그렇게 보면은 미국은 미주 대륙은 미국의 유니폴라를 절대적으로 유지하고, 다른 지역에서는요 유니폴라라기보다는 파트너십을 통한 약화된 유니폴라를 유지하는 게 트럼프 행정부의 정책이고, 이것이 바로 프라이머리 리스폰시빌리티를 동맹국에게 강요하는 배경이라고 봅니다. 세 번째 이슈는 스트래티직 플렉서빌리티, 전략적 유연성이에요. 이게 왜 중요하냐? 이번에 이란 전쟁에서도 나타났잖아요. 과거에는요 한 20년 전만 해도 잘 아시는 것처럼 미국이 2MTW 윈윈 스트래티지를 이야기했어요. 그것은 뭐냐? Two Major Theater War가 발생했을 때 2개 이상의 전국급 전쟁이죠. 그러니까 6.25 전쟁과 같은 큰 전쟁을 이야기합니다. 베네수엘라 로드리게스 체포작전은 Theater War라고 하지 않아요. Two Major Theater War가 그 당시에는 한반도와 중동에서 발생했을 때 2개의 전쟁에 동시에 개입하고 동시에 승리한다는 전략이었어요. 하지만 이게 현실적으로 제한되니까 미국이 나중에 강조한 게 바로 Strategic Flexibility입니다. 이번에 중동 전쟁을 하고 있으면서 한국에 있는 패트리엇 시스템이나 일부 자산을 동원한 것이 그런 것이고, 우리는 이 부분을 우려하는 목소리를 제가 많이 들었는데요. 미국의 전략 개념이 바뀐 것이고, 이것은 한반도에서 유사 상황이 발생했을 때 다른 지역에 있는 미국의 전략 자산이 체계적으로 유입된다면 대한민국 안보에 나쁘지 않다 하는 점도 우리가 알면서 지켜봐야 된다. 그렇기 때문에 이 세 가지 키워드가 트럼프 행정부의 대외 정책의 원칙과 같은 기조와 같은 역할을 하고 있다. 이렇게 말씀드릴 수 있겠습니다. 그럼 뉴 월드 오더는 어떻게 형성될 것이냐? 지금 형성되는 과정에 있던 것 같아요. 트럼프 대통령이 완성을 할지 몰라도 트럼프 대통령이 이야기한 제가 아까 말씀드린 아메리칸 컨티넨트에서의 미국의 절대적 우위, 그리고 다른 세 가지 지역인 거죠. 인도태평양, 중동, 유럽에서의 동맹국들과의 파트너십을 통한 영향력 행사, 이러한 이거를 일각에서는 뭐 멀티폴라 인터내셔널 워드라고도 이야기할 수도 있고 또 뭐 컴플렉스 월드 오더라고 이야기할 수 있지만 일종의 하이브리드 US 유니폴라 스트레이티지라고도 저는 이름을 붙일 수 있다고 생각해요. 미국이 그렇게 구상하고 있고 이러한 시스템에 과연 도전을 할 수 있는 나라가 있느냐? 경제적으로는 중국이 어느 정도 도전을 하고 있어요. 그리고 그 영향력을 무시할 수 없다고 생각합니다. 하지만 이번에 이란 전쟁에서 목격된 바는요, 아마 제가 은퇴할 때까지 이제 한 10년 남은 것 같아요. 10년 이내에 미국의 군사적인 유니폴라 슈퍼리어리티, 우월성은요 누구도 도전할 수 없다. 그게 이번 이란 전쟁에서 확고하게 드러났다고 생각합니다. 왜 그러냐? 군사력을요 다른 지역에 투사할 수 있는 역량을 가진 나라가 미국밖에 없어요. 우리가 러시아 이야기하지만 러시아는 국경 지역에서 전쟁을 할 수 있습니다. 중국요? 중국도 사실은 국경 지역에서만 전쟁을 할 수 있어요. 그렇기 때문에 이 우월성, 전 세계적으로 관여를 할 수 있는 군사적 역량을 갖춘 나라는 미국밖에 없고, 그리고 그 군사적 우월성도 탁월하다는 것을 확인했고, 그 상대적으로 다른 나라는 투사할 역량이 없기 때문에 지금 미국 트럼프 대통령이 생각하고 있는 월드 오더, 그것을 사람에 따라 다르게 이름을 붙일 수 있겠지만 제가 생각하는 그 어떻게 보면 하이브리드적인 월드 오더에 도전할 수 있는 나라는 당분간은 없다. 동시에 다음 대통령, 미국의 다음 대통령이 민주당이 되었든 공화당이 되었든 지금 이러한 미국 트럼프 대통령이 만들어 놓은 그것에 혜택이 있습니다. 왜? 약간 명분은 떨어지지만 저비용 고효율이에요. 이게 안타깝지만 그렇습니다. 동맹국의 입장으로서 저는 미국이 2MTW 이야기했을 때가 훨씬 좋았어요. 제 early 커리어였죠. 90년대 2000년대 초반하면 그때는 미국과 이런저런 이야기를 하면은 걱정하지 마, 우리가 해결해 줄 거야, 그렇게 얘기했어요. 진짜. 중국 얘기요? 걱정하지 마. 그런데 지금은 얘기가 달라지잖아요. 그렇지만 그것이 뭐예요? 현재 상황을 모두 평가한 미국의 전략적 입장이고, 그렇기 때문에 사실은 미국의 다음 행정부가 온다 해도 이 방향 자체가 바뀌기는 쉽지 않을 가능성이 있는 것이고, 이러한 변형된 스타일의 세계 질서에 우리가 적응하는 과제가 필요한 것이고, 그것이 자연스럽게 제 세 번째 토픽인 한미 동맹과 관련된 한반도와 관련 문제인 거죠. 뭐냐? 트럼프 행정부의 이러한 접근은, 그리고 변화될 수 있는 새로운 세계 질서는 우리에게 도전과 기회를 가져다 줍니다. 항상 나쁜 거 먼저 이야기하는 게 좋아요. 그 다음에 희망이 보이니까. 안 좋은 게 뭐냐? 도전이라는 건 뭐냐? 아까 이야기한 primary responsibility를 지라는 거예요. 그렇기 때문에 우리가 한미동맹을 유지하지만 우리가 자체 군사력도 훨씬 더 증강해야 되는 것이고, 미국과의 여러 가지 거래, 과거 미국이 어떻게 보면은 눈 감았던 여러 가지 경제적 거래에 있어서의 혜택은 사실상 줄어들 것이다. 이것이 대한민국 앞에 놓여진 엄청난 도전입니다. 이거 쉬운 거 아니에요. 지금 트럼프 대통령이 계속해서 동맹국이 도와주지 않고 있다. 저는 거기에는 두 가지 복선이 있다고 생각합니다. 하나는 무엇이냐? 군사적으로 안 도와줬으니까 앞으로 군사적인 차원에서 미국의 기여가 줄어들 수 있어. 그게 하나고요. 두 번째, 이게 더 무섭죠. 미국이 이제 다 일반 관세를 하지 못하게 된 이후로 뭐합니까? 슈퍼 301조에 따라서 각국에 대해서 조사를 시작하고 있습니다. 거기에 대해서 미국 행정부가 상당히 harsh하게 나올 수 있다는 점을 우리가 기억해야 되고, 이런 것들이 사실은 미국 전략 변화, 그 중에서도 가장 핵심적인 primary response를 부담해야 되는 도전 요인이라고 봐요. 그럼 기회 요인, 좋은 건 뭐가 있냐? 좋은 것도 있습니다. 우리가 어떻게 했느냐에 따라서 조금 달라질 수도 있지만, 가장 좋은 건 우리가 군사력을 강화하면서 과거 미국의 다른 행정부면 쉽게 주지 않았던 선물을 받잖아요. 우리가 잘 알고 있는 핵추진 잠수함. 핵추진 잠수함과 관련해서 지금 진행이 되고 있는데, 이런 것들은 사실은 제 경험으로 과거 non-proliferation을 강조하던, 비확산을 강조하던 민주당 정부였으면 받아내기 어려웠을 거라고 생각합니다. 그렇기 때문에 지금 트럼프 행정부 임기 동안 빨리 추진해서 우리가 적당한 방향으로 나아가야 돼요. 다만 이것과 관련해서 조금 더 체계적인 방법이 필요하고, 우리가 궁극적인 전략 목표, 설명드릴 시간이 없기 때문에 결론만 말씀드린다면은, 우리가 이 핵추진 잠수함을 북한에 대한 전략적 자산으로 활용하기 위해서 먼 훗날 한미 간의 핵공유의 자산으로 활용해야 되고, 그렇게 하기 위해서는 저는 지금 언론에 나오는 것보단 약간 더 큰 핵추진 잠수함을 만들어야 된다고 생각해요. 버지니아급 정도는. 설명을 하자 보면 길어서 넘어가겠습니다. 두 번째, 아까 처음 이야기한 뭐예요? Flexible Realism은요, 현 정부가 북한과 접근하는 데 있어서 기회 요인이에요. Flexible Realism이라는 것이 별게 아닙니다. 과거 같으면 상대하지 않을 나쁜 레짐이라도요, 자기하고 뜻이 맞으면, 거래가 되면 거래하겠다는 거예요. 뭐예요? 김정은 정권의 도덕성이나 인권 문제나 이런 거 트럼프 행정부는 제기하지 않을 겁니다. 대신에 미국과 어떤 거래를 할 수 있는가, 그래서 도발을 하지 않는다면, 안정을 유지한다면, 미국에 도전하지 않는다면, 저는 트럼프 대통령과 김정은 위원장의 정상회담 가능성은 있고, 이 부분을 우리가 잘 관리할 필요가 있다. 잘 관리할 필요가 있다고 제가 한 가지 더 덧붙이는 거는, 저는 우리가 북한 비핵화만큼은 반드시 유지해야 할 가치라고 생각하는데, 이 부분이 훼손되면 안 된다고 생각해요. 아무튼 이 부분도 있고, 또 마지막 키워드라고 있는 strategic flexibility, 전략적 유연성도요, 사실은 우리에게 좋은 점이 있기 때문에 그 부분도 잘 활용할 필요가 있고, 이런 부분은 앞으로 한미 간에 더 논의를 해야 된다고 생각합니다. 그리고 마지막 미국의 장점을 말씀드릴게요. 이렇게 보면 내가 미국을 대변하는 것 같은데 그건 아닙니다. 무슨 장점이냐? 제가 1995년에 국방연구원에 들어가서 외교 업무 일을 시작했으니까, 그 당시에는 클린턴 행정부였어요. 클린턴, 부시, 오바마, 그 다음에 트럼프, 바이든, 트럼프, 이 6차례의 정권 교체를 하면서 제가 느낀 게 있어요. 미국은요, 민주주의 국가가 맞아요. 그렇기 때문에 정책이 조정이 돼요. 국민들의 뜻에 의해서, 또는 동맹국의 뜻에 의해서. 그렇기 때문에 미국과 협조를 해 나갈 때, 지금 미국이 잘못하고 있는 부분, 저도 지적하자면 10가지는 지적할 수 있습니다. 그렇지만 그런 지적들이 미국의 자정기능을 통해서 조정이 되고 있다는 면도 있기 때문에, 우리가 중요한 것은 우리가 미국에 할 말을 해 나가면서 대한민국 국익과 미국의 국익을 조화롭게 맞추는 선택을 했을 때, 우리가 대한민국의 평화와 번영을 유지할 수 있는 가장 정도라고 생각해요. 그런 부분에서의 정책을 기대해 봅니다. 이상입니다.
우리 신범철 차관님께서 그 트럼프 대통령 입장에서 전 정책을 아주 설득력 있게 설명을 하셨는데, 그 트럼프 대통령이 이제 동맹을 대하는 것이 과거와 같이 어떤 가치, value based alliance라기보다는 이 transactional alliance라고 표현을 할 수 있지 않으면은, 그런 가치 체계나 이런 것보다는 현실적인 그 이해관계에 따져서 얼마든지 플렉서블하게 대응할 수 있다. 또 그런 정책으로 나간다. 하는 측면에서 말씀하신 것 같은데 제가 거기 한마디만 더 트럼프 대통령 입장에서 본다면은 기본적인 어떤 퍼셉션이 동맹에 대해서 너희들 너무 프리라이드 하고 있지 않느냐, 너무 이렇게 미국에 의존해서 안이하게 니네는 네 아까 얘기한 그 primary responsibility라고 신장께서 말씀하셨는데 그런 주인의식을 가지고 책임을 질 생각을 안 하고 너무 미국에 의존해 있는데 저는 2차 대전 이후에 80년 동안 미국이 좀 피곤하다 이거예요. 세계의 경찰로서 프리월드의 지도자로서 이렇게 역할을 하는 것이 좀 피로가 있는데 이제 좀 동맹국들이 이렇게 잘 살고 하니까 그건 유럽에 대해서도 마찬가지로 생각해요. 미국은 항상 유럽 국가가 방위비에 있어서 GDP에 미국의 반도 안 쓰는 이런 퍼센테이지로 봐서 이런 것에 최고 하여튼 그런 국방비를 증액하라는 것이 미국의 요구였는데 유럽 국가들이 거기에 대해서 그렇게 응하지를 않았고 그 다음에 아까 고이즈미 총리 제가 했습니다마는 일본에서 방위비를 GDP의 1%를 넘느냐 안 넘느냐가 엄청 큰 정치적인 이슈였는데 벼랑간에 어느 날 트럼프 대통령 들어오셔서 이게 2%로 그것도 올리겠다. 이런 그 정책 변경을 보면은 어떻게 보면 트럼프 대통령의 그런 정책이 효과가 아까 저비용 고효율을 말씀하셨는데 그런 것인가? 우리는 다행히 이제 2.5% 이상 항상 매년 국방비를 증액함으로써 미국의 요구에 100%는 아니지만 막 90% 이상 응한 것이 아닌가 하는 이런 생각이 듭니다. 그럼 우선 그 네 분의 기조 프레젠테이션이 끝났습니다만 이 플로어를 오픈해서 질문을 받기 전에 시간이 좀 있으니까 제가 먼저 네 분에게 좀 질문을 드리겠습니다. 좀 알렉스 웡 좀 정치적으로 민감한 이슈인지 모르겠습니다. 또 트럼프 대통령을 직접 모신 그런 보좌관의 입장에서 금년 11월 미국의 중간 선거가 있습니다. 현재 여러 가지 상황으로 국내 정세를 볼 때 물론 아직도 소위 트럼프 대통령의 지지 세력이 국내에서는 매우 큰 반면에 또 노킹 그 데모스트레이션이 정부에서 열리고 하는 이런 여러 가지 복잡한 상황에도 불구하고 금년 11월 3일 중간선거에서 현재 공화당이 상하 양원을 계속 다수당을 유지할 수 있는지 어떻게 평가하시는지 만약에 답변하시기가 곤란하시다면 답변을 안 하셔도 됩니다만은 거기에 대해서 조금 한마디 여쭤보고 싶고 그 다음에 한마디만 더 하면은 이번에 이스라엘과 미국이 이란에 대해서 이제 폭격을 했는데 이러한 것이 영어로 preventive war라고 그러나요? 아니면 조금 그런 잠재적인 위협이 있다고 그래서 그렇게 전쟁을 핵 개발이나 이런 거 잠재적인 위협을 prevent 제거한다는 의미에서 전쟁을 개시하는 것에 대한 여러 가지 국제법적인 논쟁에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 좀 구체적인 제가 질문을 해서 미안합니다만 거기에 대해서 좀 답변을 해주시기 바랍니다.
Thanks for the question. Let me tackle the first question first about the U.S. midterm elections. Look, the historical norm is that no matter which president it is, no matter how popular they are, no matter what party they are, the midterm election, the election that occurs in as per the name, in the middle of their term, usually is a tougher election for the president in power and his party. And that's particularly true in the second term presidencies. But I'll make 2 points. Number one, in the last midterm that President Trump had in Trump 1, the party actually, Republicans, did surprisingly well. And you never really know until Election Day. As they say, political polling, and I somewhat come from the world of politics, is really just a snapshot in time. And some of them have proven in this age of people not really answering their phones and not having being online and not really responding to polls. It's tough to predict. But we will see where we are in November. We will see where the economy is. We will see where inflation is. We will see where the evidence of the benefits of the president's policies, whether they materialize. And that will be the determinant of how the election goes in November. But the second point I'll make is the usual pattern post-midterms, or really just in the second half of any president's term, particularly in the second term, is that the president will turn more towards foreign policy. They do that because it becomes harder to execute a domestic policy when you need legislative movement in Congress, and the president's powers across foreign policy are much wider and do not need as much assent from Congress. That's the way our Constitution is designed. So, interestingly, in the first half, which we're in the middle of President Trump's second term, he has been very much involved on foreign policy. He's been very much involved on issues, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Iran, Gaza. He's been very focused on this. So, oddly and ironically, I don't see much of a change happening after the midterms in terms of his focus on foreign policy. He very much wants to leave a legacy, in his own words, of strengthening America abroad, where he can, making peace, but advancing the United States' strategic position. And I think he's very much focused on that legacy. So I think the pace, the attention on foreign policy will continue post midterms. On your second question, look, I hear from my fellow panelists, and obviously there's discussion and discomfort with the now 5-week-old war in Iran. And that's understandable when you look at effects on oil prices, when you look at energy, the constraints on energy. That's understandable when people are looking at how the markets are reacting and the downward pressure that uncertainty created by conflict has on public markets. But I want to point out 2 things. If you actually look at the oil prices, and just looking at the U.S. stock market as an example of stock indexes, if you look at the decreases in let's say the Dow Jones Industrial Index, yes, it has been downward. But if you look at the disruptions during COVID, if you look at the disruptions during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if you look at the disruptions going back to the economic crises in 2008, very surprisingly, the effects on oil markets and the stock markets has been surprisingly moderate, given where we are. And I think that's for 2 reasons. One is the track record of President Trump in taking some of these military actions. The recent track record in Venezuela is that he is able to achieve political and strategic ends through military action, but not embroil the United States in a long-term conflict, the types of which we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that is, I believe, obviously, I do know, and I think it's clear that's his objective in Iran, and his track record proves that out. So I think people are factoring that into their reactions and into the markets. But number 2, focusing purely on energy, the Trump administration policy combined with some diversification efforts from partners across the world, like in Germany and elsewhere, has been to enhance energy security, has been to open up and take the regulatory restrictions off of the production of traditional energy, as well as renewables and new sources of energy generation. This creates greater energy security. If we were in this position in Iran, perhaps 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, I think the effects in the energy markets would have been much more severe. And in that respect, perhaps it wouldn't have happened, given the evaluation of what the economic effects would be. But because President Trump has enhanced, from the American side, the elements of national power in terms of energy production and energy security, and again, corresponding actions from partners in Europe and elsewhere, that enables strategic options to deal with the problem of Iran. The other point I want to make about Iran is I understand the discomfort anytime there is a conflict of this magnitude, particularly in a hot-button region like the Middle East. But it is not, we can't forget that Iran was not a stable situation prior to this. Iran has not been a stable situation ever since the Ayatollahs took power in 1979. And just from the American perspective, the advent of the Islamic Republic really began with a hostage situation for the U.S. Embassy that lasted 444 days. It continued with terrorist attacks on our Marines and other diplomatic facilities in the Middle East and Lebanon. It continued through the Iraq War, where Iranian proxies killed hundreds of American soldiers and airmen and sailors through terrorist proxies. It continued with terrorist proxies being formed around the Middle East, putting pressure on our partner and ally, Israel, as well as U.S. interests. It continued with assassination attempts and plots that were thankfully foiled against not just U.S. leaders, including President Trump, but the Saudi ambassador in D.C. And while all these actions were taking of a conventional and terrorist nature, Iran was on a steady march towards nuclear capability. And if they achieved that nuclear capability, it would insulate Iran from any pressure to mitigate and counter its destabilizing activities across the region and then truly across the world. And this is a threat, again, not just to America, although we have a very acute threat from Iran. This was a threat to Europe. This is why Europe and the United States work together to achieve some sort of agreement or work towards an agreement on the nuclear program in Iran over the past 15 years. But Iran has not agreed to abide by its international obligations in the nuclear realm. And that, combined with its aggressive nature, its record of aggression, was unacceptable. President Trump is taking action now. But if we run the counterfactual where he did nothing, in a few short years, months, or however long the timeline was, that Iran irreversibly obtained the ability to have turnkey ability to produce a nuclear weapon, combined with terrorist proxies across the Middle East, as well as its conventional capabilities, missiles that can reach Europe, missiles that can reach even farther, given what they've tried to do in hitting the American base in Diego Garcia. That would have been a festering threat, and perhaps a permanent one, in the heart of the Middle East. So the hope is that this action will denude Iran of its capabilities to threaten the world, and that in the medium and long term, we're actually on a much more stable pathway in the Middle East, in a much more peaceful world as a result of this action.
네, 상세한 설명 감사한데 지금 알렉스 원께서 그 이란의 그런 그 소위 나쁜 짓이라고 그럴까요? 악당 같은 짓 뭐 이런 얘기를 하니까 제가 문득 무슨 생각이 떠올랐냐면 여러분들 기억하시겠지만 그게 아마 부시 대통령이 2000년도에 당선되고 나서 그 Axis of Evil, 악의 축이라는 단어를 썼어요. 거기 이제 시리아, 이란, 북한, 이렇게 쿠바 이렇게 들어갔는데 하긴 베네수엘라는 지금 마두로 정권 이전에 샤베스 정권 때 미국이 석유 개발에 투자한 거를 국유화 압수하고 또 미국에 대해서 계속 적대적인 행사를 했지만 그때 부시 대통령은 베네수엘라는 그 악의 축으로는 지명을 안 했어요. 근데 시리아는 지금 아사드 정권이 물러갔고 그 쿠바는 지금 이란 전쟁 때문에 잊혀졌지만은 석유를 베네수엘라가 특별히 저가에 공급받은 게 끊어지니까 지금 완전히 청소차도 안 다녀가지고 시내 곳곳이 엉망이고 또 시민들이 현 공산당 집권당의 당사에 불을 지르고 하는 저항이 생기고 아마 조만간 쿠바도 뭔가 차라리 쿠바의 시민 어떤 사람은 미국이 빨리 개입을 해서 이걸 좀 살 수 있도록 해달라는 그런 데모도 하는 뉴스를 봤고요. 근데 이란도 사실 다 잊어버렸지만 1979년에 이제 팔레비 왕조가 끝나고 그 호메니가 이제 신정 체제를 불란서망에 돌아와가지고 하면서 그때 그 이란에 있는 미국 대사관 직원 전체를 인질로 잡아가지고 2년 동안 그걸 억류를 하고 있었어요. 그래서 그걸 풀어준 게 81년도 1월 28일로 기억하는데 제가 왜 날짜까지 기억하면 그날 제가 뉴욕에 있었어요. 그래서 뉴욕에 그 인질들이 풀려나온 그 장면을 기억했고 그다음에 이란이 또 보면요. 지금 그 이스라엘의 하마스를 재정적으로 무기 지원을 해가지고 계속 그 지난 3년 전에는 1,200명의 무고한 그 이스라엘 시민들 그 축제하는 데 가서 2시간 만에 1,200명을 살해한다는 건 엄청 200여 명을 인질로 잡고 그다음에 여러분 헤즈볼라 레바논 그것도 이란이 재정적으로 무기 지원을 해가지고 계속 레바논의 어떤 하나의 정파로 자리 잡도록 그렇게 지원을 하고 이러므로써 그 지역 평화를 계속 그 안정적인 걸 해치고 있고 그다음에 지금 이쪽 홍해 쪽 수에즈 운해 쪽으로 건너가는 그 예멘 북예멘의 후치 반군이라고 그러죠. 그것도 지금 몇십 년째 이란이 혁명수비대가 무기와 자금을 지원해서 어떻게 보면 이게 excess of evil이라도 요새 보면 excess of resistance 저항의 축이라고 그러는데 이란이 지원을 하는 그 하마스, 헤즈볼라, 후치 이런 세력 그러나 미국이 항상 거기에 대해서 신경을 쓰고 걱정을 하고 하는 그런 상황 이렇게 생각이 나네요. 그래서 하여튼 이란 전쟁이 어떻게 좀 잘 조기에 수습되고 해서 다시 그 지역이 평화가 되고 에너지 수급에도 좀 정상화되고 우리 한국은 중동의 석유를 아마 70% 의지하고 있고 천연가스는 카타르에 주로 이제 한 20%. 그래도 가스는 그동안에 많이 다변화를 해가지고 한 20% 정도 중동에 의존하기 때문에 어쨌지만 하여튼 한국은 대외 무역이 GDP에서 차지하는 비용이 거의 90% 가까이 되기 때문에 국제 무역이 타격을 받으면 한국 경제가 더 큰 직격탄을 받기 때문에 빨리 국제 정세가 정상화되기를 이렇게 바라는 마음입니다. 두 번째 야부나카 선생님께 질문을 하겠습니다. RCEP가 이제 이쪽 그 Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership에서 RCEP, RCEP인데 일본이 역할을 많이 하시고 거기는 이제 아세안 10개국이 다 들어가 있고 뉴질랜드, 호주에서 한국, 일본, 중국 이렇게 한 거대한 경제협력체인데 이런 일본이 계속 그런 리저널한 역할을 특히 트럼프 2기 1기 때 있는 국제적인 멀티내셔널 코퍼레이션에 대해서 사실 큰 관심을 안 보이기 때문에 누군가가 또 지역 평화, 국제 평화, 국제 무역 이걸 위해서는 역할을 좀 해야 되지 않나 하는 측면에서 매우 반가운 그런 얘기인데 한 가지 구체적으로 좀 물어보면은 그 이제 이란 전쟁 관련해 가지고 과거 걸프전 때와 같이 아까 10시에 그 트럼프 대통령이 나토나 동맹국이 안 도와줬다. 거기에 대한 대가를 치르겠다. 그런데 그 뭐 301조에 대한 뭐 이런 책임 전가보다는 혹시 걸프전과 같이 비용 상당한 전비가 들어갔는데 그런 비용을 좀 분담하라 하고 당시 우리는 걸프전 때는 5억 불인가를 냈을 겁니다. 근데 일본은 우리보다 한 10배는 낸 것 같아요. 그 GDP 그 당시만 해도 일본의 경제력이 한국과 월등했기 때문에 그런 경우에 대해서는 어떻게 생각을 하십니까? 어떤 기여를 뭐 평화헌법 때문에 소외정을 보낼 수 없다 그랬고 일본의 입장에서 대미 직접 투자를 공약을 했는데 미국이 만약에 직접적인 전쟁 비용에 대한 분담을 아마 제일 먼저 일본에 요구할 것 같은데 그럼 일본이 응하면 한국도 따라가야 될 거고 이런 상황에 대해서는 어떻게 생각해 보신 적이 있는지?
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, Japan heavily depended upon the oil from Middle East. And although 1970s, it was a great shock when oil shock happened. But since then, that we failed actually to diversify sort of the source of crude oil coming, and still at 90% we count on with regard to oil from Middle East. So this is a renewed sort of sense of urgency and seriousness that how to tackle with this situation, diversifying all kinds of sort of source of the crude oil and otherwise. But with regard to this specific problems, question might come from President Trump that Japan should do more or burden sharing. And indeed, in the Gulf the crisis, at that time, that $13 billion, Japan paid about 1/3 of the entire military expenditures covered by Japan alone. That happened without much of a praise or appreciations at all from the world. Today, that the Prime Minister Takaichi, in a sense, succeeded in the last White House meeting that by flattering whatever that I said, President Trump didn't push much harder to Japan. You are the one to secure the Strait of Hormuz, since you are very much counting on the import from that region. And what, according to the press report, and the Prime Minister Takaichi said is that, yes, we are ready to do what we can do under the current legal framework. We can't do more than that, certain things. And I don't know how much specifics she clarified, but as we, I think that the assume once a ceasefire takes place, that Japan will be there to do some things with regard to the safety of the Strait of Hormuz, kind of navigations type of things. Beyond that, I don't know about burden sharings, cost sharings with regard to money, whether it will come or not. And certainly that when it comes, Japan should be also maybe in a situation where we can do what we can do under current situations. But more than that, certainly Japan should make much more efforts to bring out the kind of ceasefire and the peace in this region in the Middle East. Japan and Iran enjoyed very long-standing sort of relations. I once said to the American friends, when I was about to visit Iran, there's a kind of sign from America, you should not go there at this moment. I'm talking about 2007 or 2008, because sending a kind of wrong sort of message to the world or to Iran. I said, well, thank you very much for that advice. But nonetheless, Japan enjoyed long-standing relations with Iran dated back to 1300 years. And we know each other very well. We respect each other. But when it comes to nuclear, there's no compromise on the part of Japan. That was a very clear-cut sort of messages. And over that, but nonetheless, communications are very important. How much we can do at this current sort of situations, we don't know, but I think there are rooms to do so. So without waiting for any kind of burden sharing type of request from America, we should do our own sort of efforts to advance some things very important to the world, that is bring about some kind of more stable relations, including Iran. That's what I hope that our government can do that. Thank you.
그다음에 그 슈미트 대사님께 말씀 좀 여쭤보겠습니다. 지금 트럼프 대통령이 이란 전쟁에서 나토가 좀 참여를 하라고 요구를 한 것에 대해서 그 나토 사무총장인가 그 나토는 이게 방어 동맹이지 이 공격 동맹은 아니다 하는 뭐 이런 논리로 거절을 했다고 그러시는데 거기에 대해서 미국이 상당히 좀 격한 반응을 하고 나토 탈퇴 문제까지 물론 나왔는데 뭐 저는 그럴 가능성은 희박하다고 보는 거지만은 그런 것도 염두에 두고 지금 나토 각국이 국방비를 증액해서 너무 미국에 의존하는 그런 상황을 좀 벗어나야 되지 않을까 하는 데 있어서는 나토 각국들이 어떤 컨센서스가 있는 것도 하고 실제로 상당한 국방비를 증액하는 것을 알고 있습니다. 거기에 대해서 한번 코멘트를 해주시고 또 하나는 이와 관련해서 나토 입장에서는 우크라이나 전쟁이 가장 큰 이슈인데 푸틴이 얼마 전에 그 전술 핵무기도 사용할 수 있을 것 같은 그런 언급을 했는데 과연 푸틴이 그런 전술 핵무기를 우크라이나 전쟁에서 사용할 가능성이 다만 조금이라도 있다고 유럽은 판단하고 있는지 거기 두 가지 측면에서 좀 코멘트를 해주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Whenever NATO gets into action, it has to be unanimous decision. Basically, there are very clear procedures in the NATO, in NATO, and you have to get all the allies on board. And there have been NATO missions out of area. I mean, there was a NATO mission in Afghanistan, but it was after careful consideration, and you had to have everybody on board. That's a very different way from beginning hostilities and then later on involving a structure. It does not work that way. And I think if we had these discussions, all the counter arguments against whether this military action is really achieving the purposes would have been brought on the table in a much more structured way. Of course, European nations are very worried about the nuclear issue. And that's why we have been negotiating. We've been very involved in negotiations. I remember even a time when all the P5 plus Germany were all involved in putting a lot of pressure jointly on Iran, and we were achieving something. Of course, we're worried about the ballistic missiles. You mentioned that they can also hit Europe. It's a threat for Europe as well. And I think there's not much love lost on the regime currently in Iran. We have been always very critical about the human rights violations, the widespread human rights violations. The question is just, does this military action really achieve the goals? And the goalposts seem to be changing if I look at it from the outside. Does it achieve a more benign, more constructive Iranian government? So far not. Maybe it will. Does it achieve the willingness to actually have a nuclear deal? Let's see. Does it make Israel safer? Does it make the Gulf states safer? All these discussions, I think, would have come up in a very long way if there had been a discussion before with NATO, but there wasn't any. So the threat to withdraw from NATO, yes, it's. I think this is something that happened in the during the first administration, and there have been always tensions between various U.S. administrations and NATO, and there was happiness, unhappiness, and if I look back, even in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War, only 2 NATO allies allowed actually the Americans to use to support that. It was Portugal and the Netherlands at that time. But of course, any undermining of the NATO defense structures and the very strong political, also military structure would have grave implications, for the security in Europe, but I would also say grave implications for the security of the US. If you look at the advanced systems where they are placed, if you look at if the US views Russia as a strategic threat, where are the bases? They're in the North Atlantic, in Canada and others, and of course, where does the US project power to in the Middle East? A lot of it is done via NATO allies, and I think this is a discussion which is very, very serious because it affects the security of the European continent. It affects the security of, I think, North America, and we should be very, very careful to send signals because we feel, from a German perspective, that the present Putin administration is ready to test NATO's readiness. We see that all the time with little pinpricks here. A flight incursion into Poland, a flight incursion in the Baltic Sea, a flight incursion here and there. We're in the middle of a hybrid war it's gone way beyond Ukraine. That's why we say Ukraine is the most serious security challenge for us. So I would not want to really. This is a very serious issue for us, and I would not want to speculate about the use of nuclear weapons in that conflict. We had a lot of discussions. I was actually quite not relieved, but I think it was a good move when our Chancellor Scholz went to Beijing at that time, and in close coordinations with others, stood in front of in Beijing and said Xi Jinping and I agreed that no nuclear weapons should be used. That was quite something. I think at the moment still the threshold for the actual use of nuclear weapons is very, very high. We've only seen it twice in Japan, and I think it's for nuclear and non-nuclear powers, it's our joint responsibility to keep the threshold as high as possible, the political and the moral threshold, that it's very, very difficult to employ them. Because once we see a nuclear weapon being employed, whether it's in Europe or whether it's here, I mean, you're under the threat, Korea is under the threat of a nuclear doctrine from North Korea, I think we're living in a very different reality. And that's something we should be extremely, extremely careful. Thank you.
감사합니다. 상세한 설명 감사드리고 신범철 차관님께 간단한 질문이지만 어려운 질문을 하나 하겠습니다. 아까 그 전략적 유연성, strategic flexibility, 뭐 큰 그런 중동과 이런 동북아시아의 작전 개념, 시어터워 개념과 별도로 이 전략적 유연성은 주한미군에도 적용이 되는데 주한미군의 전략적 유연성 문제가 가장 큰 문제고 그거하고 밀접하게 관련된 것이 전시작전권 문제거든요. 그 문제에 대해서는 어떻게 생각을 하십니까? 이 주한미군의 전략적 유연성 문제하고 전시작전권 환수 문제에 대한 연관성, 그 두 문제가 별개의 이슈라고는 저는 생각하지 않는데 하나의 같은 이슈라고 생각하는데 거기에 대한 생각을 좀 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
말씀하신 것처럼 지금 어떻게 보면은 한미 동맹에 여러 가지 현안이 있는데 그 현안 중에 가장 민감한 게 이 두 이슈인 것 같아요. 그런데 일단 작년 10월 한미 정상회담의 팩트 시트를 보면 전작권 전환은 예정대로 가는 거로 얘기돼 있고 전략적 유연성도 합의가 된 거로 돼 있어요. 그렇기 때문에 사실 저는 제일 중요한 것이 양측이 공감대를 이룬 부분이 있습니다. 아주 스펙스픽한 데까지는 모르겠어요. 제가 지금 정부에 있는 게 아니기 때문에. 그렇지만 정상 간에 논의된 바가 팩트시트에 담기는 과정에서 서로가 원하는 부분이 담겼을 것이다. 그렇게 보고요. 그 두 개는 진행이 된다. 그리고 전략적 유연성과 관련해서는 몇 가지 중요한 포인트가 있는데요. 가장 중요한 것은 어느 정도 사이즈가 입출입할 때 한미 간에 사전에 컨설팅 되느냐 하는 부분이에요. 이건 제가 아는 부분도 있지만 함부로 얘기하면 안 되는 거기 때문에 여기 자리에서 말씀드릴 수도 없고요. 다만 그러한 협의가 합의된 대로 사전에 한미 간 당국 간에 긴밀히 협의되면서 전략적 유연성이 발휘되는 것은 문제되지 않는다. 그리고 흔히 전략적 유연성 문제를 우리는 이 미국의 글로벌 퍼스트와 그리고 미국의 전쟁과 필요한 서플라이 체인, 공급망 체인으로 보지 않고 사실은 중국 문제를 보고 있잖아요. 그건 또 대한민국이 이 문제 전체를 바라보지 못하는 측면도 있지만 다른 한편으로는 그만큼 우리에게 이 문제가 중요하기 때문에 그렇습니다. 저는 거기에 대한민국이 원칙을 세워놓고 미국과 협의하면 된다고 생각해요. 그 원칙이 민감해서 사실은 이야기를 안 해요. 저도 잘. 왜냐하면 이야기하면 여기 계신 우리 왕동 교수님과 같이 중국분은 서운해하실 테고 또 여기에 있는 알렉스 원과 같이 미국분은 또 서운해해요. 왜냐하면은 대한민국이 퍼스트 아니겠어요? 그렇기 때문에 제가 이야기 안 하는데 큰 흐름에서는 이렇게 말씀드릴게요. 뭐냐? 주한미군의 전략적 유연성은 한미 간에 합의한 바와 같이 추진한다. 다만 한국군이 직접 지역적 분쟁에 한국의 의도와 달리 관여되는 바는 없도록 한다. 이 말이요, 단순해 보이지만요, 엄청난 전략적 함의를 갖고 있고, 제가 지금 말씀드린 워딩으로도요, 제가 보고서 10페이지 쓰라 그러면 쓸 수 있는 내용이에요. 그 정도에서 말씀을 드리도록 하고요. 전자권 전환은 저는 이렇게 생각해요. 이것도요, 한미 간에 합의된 바가 있어요. 그것은 조건에 기반한 전자권 전환. 이것에 대해서 또 보수 진영에서는 전자권 전환하면 안 된다. 신 박사 뭐하냐, 그거 막아야지, 이렇게 저한테 전화 주시는 분도 있어요. 그런데요, 저는 그렇지 않다고 생각해요. 한미동맹의 건전성, 그리고 미국이 제공할 수 있는, 제가 다시 트럼프 대통령 이야기를 하면은 critical but more limited support, 여기에 또 다 담겨 있는 거예요. critical이 뭐예요? 핵 관련 확장 억제를 얘기하는 것이고요. 재래식 전력은 more limited support가 온다는 걸 우리가 알아야 돼요. 전자권 전환은요, 그 일부로서 우리가 인식을 해야지 미국의 전체적인 한반도 전략을 인식하면서 우리가 대미 전략을 추진할 수 있는 거예요. 다만 이 전자권 전환의 속도와 조건이 상호작용을 하면서 톱니바퀴처럼 맞물리게 되어 있는데, 우리가 속도를 앞당기기 위해서 조건을 등한시한다면 이 전자권 전환은 제가 생각하는 전자권 전환은 아니라고 생각해요. 그렇기 때문에 연합 임무 목록이라고 그래서 CMETL이라고 그래서 한미 간에 합의한 바가 있어요. 그 리스트를 잘 체크하면서 전환하면 된다. 그렇게 생각합니다. 이상입니다.
예, 감사합니다. 답변 잘해 주셔서 감사합니다. 그러면 지금 시간이 한 10분 남았는데요. 플로어에서 질문을, 여기 정세영 교수님 손을 들으셨는데.
My name is Suyong Chung. I'm a president of Seoul International Academy, which has about 40 years history, focusing on the rules-based international order regarding the foreign policy in Republic of Korea. So, because I'm speaking in English, because I want to address, with Alex Wong. I've been really enjoying the discussions by the four panels, and then everybody had points. Right? There was no wrong points at all. So what I'm trying to be interested to ask you is that there are different layers in terms of focusing on the points that you have been making. I do understand the stance of the President Trump's administration in the United States. I do understand. And then basically we have to rebuild the United States based on very strong industrial base. very clear, and then we will keep the our leadership in the world, and then it will be good for everybody. That's very good. And then what I try to understand from panelists from Japan and Germany and Europe is that we do understand. However, there is a process, and there is a process to participate to formulate that order. And then we have been friends for a long time. And then what about the assets? Even if it may not work that much well now, but there might be some values embedded. So my question goes: number one, how it's? I think my point is that what the President Trump is doing is a very short-term and then immediate issues, whereas the other panelists are raising are a little bit more mid-term and possibly long-term. So from the U.S. point of view, how would you address, incorporate, or accommodate those probably fair concerns from the other parts of the possibly including Republic of Korea? That is also related to my second question to you. I know that you are associated with some of the Korean business these days. What you have addressed is very good for their military industry, rebuilding military industry in Korea, right? It's wonderful. But that company, some companies deals with not only military, but also energy, and then renewable, and other global business. So how would you recommend to big Korean companies, which may be exposed to not only military issues, but also other issues? They are pretty much based on global public goods in order to expand and penetrate the future market. Many of them are located in Africa that we have never mentioned today. They are growing the 7 to 10% every year in terms of GDP. They are very young continent. We know that that's the future market. So how would you able to recommend to big Korean companies not only addressing this short-term based or immediate military industry rebuilding, also expanding the other future big markets? So how would you say that? Thank you.
Let me try to address, because you raised a number of, I think, very, very interesting and important kind of topics to understand the U.S.-ROK relationship, particularly on investment in trade and economics. You're right that there's a focus by the Trump administration on enhancing U.S. manufacturing capability, on enhancing industrial resilience. I want to point out, though, that that's not simply a preoccupation of Trump. I mean, President Biden, before him, also focused on this as well, whether that's through the CHIPS Act and other bilateral discussions on technology partnership. So I think this is a consistent through line and actually a bipartisan issue in the United States. We're looking at the makeup and the constitution of our economy, that we have to at least rebalance away from financialization and services, but again, to have a critical mass of industrial capacity. That's for a number of reasons. One is simply political and social, that there is a thought, and I think justified, that to enhance social cohesion in the United States, that productive work in manufacturing and privileging manual work and skilled labor in trades, so that there's a more balanced distribution of occupations. That's an important thing for domestic politics and social cohesion. But again, there's a national security issue here. A, to insulate the United States from any kind of economic or industrial coercion, but also if we do get into a conflict, that we have the ability to regenerate, to apply industrial power, to win and deter prolonged conflict. So that's the thinking behind it. And that's where, as I mentioned, I think in my opening remarks, partnership in the alliance with Korea in particular is obviously very helpful to the United States. You look at Korea, what Korea has achieved in 70 years. Going from an agrarian society, again, where the industries were concentrated not in the South but in the North, but now to a world-leading advanced manufacturer, high technology, operational excellence unseen across sectors. So if we're looking at investment in the United States, it's important to note, investment benefits the United States in terms of building up domestic capacity, but investment also benefits Korea, Japan, other countries that invest in the United States. There's a reason why Korea and Japan are among the top investors in FDI in the United States. There's a reason why the United States is the most attractive market for foreign investment, because of the rule of law, because of liquid capital markets, because of the size of the consumer market. That can be a benefit if there is strategic investments by Korean companies. Yes, that do help the United States from a national security and social cohesion perspective, but for long-term returns, long-term expansion of economic benefits to the Korean people, to Korean companies, and to the diversification and expansion of the global reach of Korea's companies. Korea's companies, your top companies are very impressive, but there's an opportunity here for SMEs as well. But just think about the top companies. Korea's achieved something great. Very concentrated, however, on the peninsula and in export terms. But greater investment, greater footholds in the United States will transform Korean companies into not just the world leaders, but true multinational companies with great reach. And again, form a bedrock, a foundation, a continuing and stable new dimension to the U.S.-Korea alliance.
감사합니다. 그럼 한 분만 더 질문. 여기 앉아 계십니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Layfair Keasley of Ewha Women's University. My question is to Yabunaka-san, but perhaps Dr. Shin and maybe Mr. Wong could weigh in on this as well. Question about U.S., Korea, Japan trilateral cooperation and how actually so much was achieved during previous administrations. We have very different leadership in power in all three countries. And given the stresses we've been talking about in not only the international order, but perhaps related to some U.S. foreign policies, without the sort of United States role in bringing allies together that we may have seen in previous iterations of trilateral cooperation, where do you see Korea-Japan cooperation going? Do Seoul and Tokyo actually have more incentive to work together in this current environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that now we have entered a new stage or different stage. That trilateral, in particular under President Biden, that this kind of trilateral sort of the coordination has been very much advanced, but it's against North Korea threat, or it's against Chinese, any kind of threat type of things. So how to meet with the challenges from China, or how to meet with North Korea, the three countries must work together. That's, I think, my kind of understanding why there have been that kind of arrangement or the cooperation has advanced under that President Biden's the leadership. Today, we have seen totally different things. Now, America, can we count on America? Yes, we do, we have to. But nonetheless, are you sure for 100% you can count on America? And I have talked about kind of regional cooperations in this. The East Asia is so important. And nonetheless, working with China is not so easy to accomplish. So in that sense, Japan-ROK relations are becoming much more important to advance this kind of regional cooperation. ASEAN countries are waiting for that matters to happen. And certainly that China, although that they are saying different things maybe from time to time, nonetheless, what they have been saying, yes, indeed, the kind of the international law we have to abide by, they say that these days. And sounds like that, they're ready to work also on WTO type of things. They're ready to work with us. So meaning that there are rooms for ROK and Japan to advance this regional cooperation. So the total picture is totally different. Trilateral sort of cooperations under President Biden. Today, what we have to do, kind of way of thinking must be changed.
네, 이제 다른 분들 respond 하실 게 있으시면.
There's some obstacle in trilateral cooperation. The first one is I think President Trump doesn't want to focus on the trilateral cooperation. He prefers bilateral relation and transactional deal. So I think that's the one obstacle. Second one is a traditional obstacle, which one is closely relating to the threat perception. For example, U.S. and Japan, I think their threat perception is shifting from North Korea to China. I think it's almost 10 years in my calculation, but South Korea is still focusing on North Korea. That is kind of a challenge. However, as our Japanese partner mentioned, that the backbone of trilateral cooperation is Korea-Japan relation. But this Lee Jae-myung administration still continuously developing Korea-Japan relations. So I think in overall, the trilateral cooperation is located in the good foundation. But there will be an event. For example, North Korea's nuclear test or ICBM test, there would be a more military-oriented approach with regard to trilateral cooperation. But for the time being, U.S. focus is not in the Northeast Asia, but in the Venezuela, now Iran. So I think that it is the right time to reboost the trilateral cooperation based upon President Trump understanding. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 그럼 시간이 되었으므로 이것으로서 제1세션을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you for panel.